Y'all can hear me okay? Oh, shit, that's loud. So I take it everybody can hear me. So, due to lack of introduction, I'm just going to jump right in. Hi, my name is Andrew Norcross, and we are going to discuss the art of software maintenance. Now, when I put in this topic and talked to Ryan, I did not know Jeremy had also done the exact same setup with a completely different topic, but the whole Zen thing. Now, if anybody knows me, I'm not exactly what you'd call a Zen person, but we're going to go with it. And in particular, what I'm going to talk about is maintaining a public project. Now, there's a lot of folks in this room that maintain projects much bigger than I do, for much longer than I have, that deal with a whole lot more shit than I've ever touched. So for some of you, maybe now is when you want to go get a coffee, pack your bags, I don't know. I'm not going to hurt. But there's probably just as many who are either doing what I've done with a small project, plugin, theme, or haven't put anything up yet because you're concerned not so much about me, oh my God, people are going to see my code, but like, what do I do with it when it's out in the wild? Because once it's out there, it's pretty much out there. So as I said, my name is Andrew Norcross. I founded a lead developer of an agency called Reactive Studios. We're down in Tampa and Indiana. We've got folks in Canada, and we are not hiring at the moment. Actually, I think we're the only one that's not, which that's how we're different, yeah. But, what we're going to talk about is almost every project, everything I've ever done, I start with an idea. And usually that idea is, I want to build something. And sometimes the idea is not even, I don't even know what that thing is. I just know I want to build something. I see an API. I see a new, JavaScript library. I see someone that did something that looks cool. That is usually the impetus that I have to start doing something. Rarely is it like client scoped. I don't sit down and do discovery. I'm like, I just feel like building something. And I have time at that moment, which is more and more rare. So I think the first project I built, that was my idea of what would happen possibly. I was wrong. So if that's your idea, it's probably not going to happen. Building and distributing and maintaining open projects is usually not a for-profit venture. And that doesn't mean that it can't be used in profitable things, but that's not why you do it. So the first thing I'm going to mention, throughout the talk, I'm going to mention 3 examples. And all of them were things that I built and released in some capacity at some time. So there's one called Airplane Mode. It's a plugin on GitHub, and what it does is simply, much like airplane mode on your phone, turns off all external calls, be it loading external assets or making like update calls, things like that. I built it because I was in Portland with some friends, and we had really crappy internet, and then I had a 7-hour flight with no internet, and I got tired of waiting for 7 seconds each time to try to load Google Fonts, knowing it would never load. So that's why I built it. That was my idea, because I was just upset. One of the first plugins I built, this was a bad one, was a social sharing plugin, because we all know that everyone needs more social sharing plugins. Now, mind you, this is back in, I think, 2009. So there was only maybe 10,000 of them then. But that was bad. And then this one's ugly, and this one still exists. This is one of the first plugins I made. This was the first real plugin that I built that actually had a real use. It wasn't just me figuring out if I could do something. It's got, 30, 40,000 active installs last time I checked. It's in dire need of a rewrite that I have not done yet for reasons that I will go over later. So, the first thing that I found in my own experience and the experience of others, if you're going to build something, like anything else, you need to build a foundation. You need to figure out, some of the stuff is very easy and is almost commonplace. You don't even think about it. You're like, version control, obviously. Where is it going to live? What URLs is it going to have? Then you start getting into a little bit of a deeper stuff. Okay, do you have a contributors file? Because, we'll get into it a little bit later, but if you're asking people, if you're making it public, inherently you're kind of sort of asking people to contribute. Has anyone other than me spent 2, 3, 4 hours or days writing a patch or writing a feature, submitting it, and then simply getting a won't fix, invalid, closed? Anyone other than me? Because then maybe I'm irrationally angry, but or it was that bad of a patch, but no explanation, no why, no how, just none. And I'm like, well, that's a day of my life I'm never going to get back. And that's actually happened to me twice, and both times I've never looked, used, contributed, spoke highly of that project ever again. And I have no idea to this day why it was, and now I don't even remember what it was. So when you're setting up this foundation, what you're doing is you're laying your groundwork. You're setting out how this thing is going to go. That doesn't mean that you're saying this is what everything is going to happen from now until the end of time. It's simply saying that these are how things are going to work. These are how I would prefer things to work, because again, things change. So the second part with that is a lot more important, and I've been on both sides of this, I'm sure many of you have, where there's a feature request or someone is building something out that simply does not match what you want this project, plugin, whatever to do. But they don't know that until they've done the work. And then you tell them that, well, thanks for your help, but this doesn't match up with the goals of the project, so sorry. Now, you can say that in a nice way, but you're still saying, hey, thanks for wasting your time on something I don't want. And most folks, and I put myself in that basket as well, like I feel bad when that happens if I'm on the side of saying that, sorry, don't want it, I feel bad. And then when I've been on the side of someone telling me, hey, thanks, sorry, but I don't want this, I get angry or I get frustrated. I feel like, great, I've wasted all this time. I've done all this work, and I still don't know the goals of the project. It can be, put it in your README file, put it in, somewhere in your documentation. It doesn't have to be, and this is the point, it does not have to be, this is every little thing that's going to happen over the next 6 months, 12 months, 9 months. It's just going to be, this is where we want it to go. This is our, it's goals. It can be something as boring in corporate speak as a mission statement. But what it does need to say is that, it gives people the idea, okay, if this is where you're going, I can contribute. Because I know for myself, especially with, dealing with core, there are things that I feel that I'm pretty good at, and there's things that I know that I'm terrible at. And, by having that roadmap of, if it's a large project, having even roadmaps of individual features, if it's a smaller, project, having a roadmap of just the whole project, then people who feel that they can contribute and they can read and say, okay, I can help with this. I can help get there. If not, then, your people are, that could be one of the reasons why nobody is contributing to your project, because nobody knows what the heck you want. So unless it's a bug patch, there could be people using your project that can build the thing that you want to build onto that project, and they have no idea that you even want it. So, setting up that roadmap, it can be loose, it can be, vague and kind of high level, but without it, nobody knows where it's going, nobody knows what to do. So I was going back and forth on whether to start with code, and I'm not writing any code, I'm not showing any code per se, but I'm going to start with code before I start with users, because there's actually a whole lot more to talk about with users than there is code, which is usually the case. If anyone's done this for any length of time, you understand that the code is really not that big of a part of it. So for myself, I remember, speaking about that the FAQ manager, which is, again, it still works. Despite my best efforts, it's still working. Early on, I would get, people that wanted feature requests. Sure, I can do that. Build it, throw it in, update it. I now have this load of technical debt that I'm not sure how I'm going to unwind without breaking things, and I'm going to get, again, a little more into that later. But there are, and it's also got like an options page with options that, frankly, 99% of people are never going to touch, ever. And frankly, if I would have just added some hooks and filters, when someone asked for that, like, oh, I want to make the, the fade out longer, sure. Here's the filter. Here's how you can do that. Or it's like, oh, after this event fires, I want to send it to an API. Here's the after action hook. Here's the do action. Go right ahead. By building out those hooks and filters, you give people the ability to kind of bend it and use it in a way that they see fit for themselves, without you having to disrupt your roadmap, disrupt the core of what you've put together. And what it also does is allows you to kind of not ignore, but you don't have to always worry about making everybody happy because you've given them a tool to do it without you specifically having to do it. The idea of refactoring. And again, my own experience is you do it exactly at the point that it needs to be done. Where that point is different for everybody. Don't do it early. Don't wait too long. When that right time is, I've never found it. Unfortunately, I do not know the exact point in a project when it is the right time to refactor. It's usually when things start breaking on their own without you touching them. And I've had, I can probably not the only one here that has had things that just simply start breaking. WordPress hasn't updated, your code hasn't updated, and yet things start breaking that used to work. That's usually, and then when you open up, like Safan was talking about the debugging, you've written it in a manner that you can't really do unit tests, and you're throwing errors of things that seemingly never existed before. That's usually a good point. I've got another plugin for the URLs shortener that about 6 months ago I just looked at them like this, it needs it. So I spent like 2 days to refactor the whole thing, wrote a bunch of documentation, pushed it up, dealt with like 3 weeks of bugs because people had just accommodated their workflow to my shitty code. So then when I gave them the proper code, it broke. So that was fun. And then again, things like backwards compatibility. Once it's out in the wild, once it's public, you're stuck with it. It's pretty much like having children. It doesn't really matter what they do anymore. They're your problem. And you can treat them well, you can treat them bad. Doesn't matter. They're still yours, and they're still legally your responsibility. And, there's one of the things about WordPress that I love. It pisses me off at times because I'm like, I wish we could just get rid of this stuff and move, do this, that, or the other. But then I remember my stuff works. I don't have to worry, I don't have to get super technical deep into every single release to make sure that all the code that I've written for the past 8 years is going to still work. I know that I've got a pretty solid expectation that it's going to work. I know that they're not going to change an API in a point release. They're not going to just we found a typo in a function name, so we just fixed the typo without actually just rerouting it so my old function that was built on that typo would work. And these are things that I've experienced with other projects that, it says bug fixes. That's the changelog, bug fixes. Bug fixes can be a whole lot of different things. Is it even possible to do all this stuff? Yeah. It is. You can keep backwards compatibility. You have to dedicate yourself to backwards compatibility, but you can do it. And now the important thing and the fun thing is I want to talk about users. The noted American philosopher Randall Graves once said, "This job would be great if it weren't for customers." I remember that feeling. I've had that feeling at times, but then I remember that if it weren't for users, I would not have a job, and there would really be nobody using anything I've ever written. And I'd probably still be working in finance, and I'd hate my life. So there's a reason I quit. You can't tell someone to read a manual if you haven't written a manual. Expecting most users to read source code is, what's the word I'm looking for? Stupid. They don't know how. They're not going to learn how. And frankly, it's not their job to learn how. Many times we forget that most people that are using the tools that we build are not people that build tools like us. If you listen to, there's a lot of WordCamps that have talks on, pricing and product side and all this other stuff that, users are your market, and they have jobs, and they have careers, and they have skills, and most of them have good skills. They're just not the skills that we have. So, I don't go to the auto mechanic, and the mechanic doesn't expect me to know how to fix my brakes. That's why I'm there, and I'm giving him money to do it. And, so when it comes to documentation, doc blocks are a great start. At the minimum, do that. If you flesh out your doc blocks enough, you can get pretty good documentation out of the bat. But when you get into certain hooks and filters, you need to actually write, here's what it does in English, or whatever language, English, and then, as opposed to developer talk, I say English, I don't necessarily mean the English language, I just mean not what we speak. Show some examples. The codex, while at times is outdated, is a really good example of that. Here's a very, very basic idea of what this thing is supposed to do. just enough so you can look at it and be like, okay, I can wrap my head around what the intent is, and then I can build what I want to on top of it or inside of it. But documentation is hard. Documentation takes a long time. Nobody appreciates good documentation. Everybody hates bad documentation. But it's got to be done. And what I found, there's times where I have to refer to my own documentation because it was something that I wrote like 18 months ago, 2 years ago. Like, I don't remember what I did yesterday. I really don't remember some code. Like, there was a reason why I wrote this. I don't know why I wrote this. I find a function and I'm like, okay, what is this all about? Getting back to the idea of requests, they certainly are not equal. You will get feature requests that are just dumb, for lack of a better term. They are just dumb. Or they don't fit the project, or they're just simply not something that you want to do. And there are ways to handle that. Again, using hooks and filters, if you make it extendable enough, not only can people do weird stuff that they want to do with your code, but you can do weird stuff you want to do with your code. I mean, there are plenty of plugins that I've written that I will implement filters, and then I will use my own filter in that plugin. So that way I can keep the core clean. I don't have, if I need backwards compatibility, I don't actually have to change it. And it reduces the idea of having to give options. Now this is the idea, patches welcome. Many of us, and I've been in the same way, when we say patches welcome, we think, come on, get in the boat, contribute, let's all make this thing better. But most of the time, that's what it actually is saying. Most of the time, saying the words, patches welcome, is telling someone to go away and stop bothering me. It's used way too often as a way to end a conversation, be it online, in a thread, whatever the case may be. That's not to say that sometimes, you can tell someone, I'm done with this conversation, just kind of throwing patches welcome. It's just I know that's not the intent for most people, but I'd say 90% of the time, that's the appearance. It makes it seem like you're just being dismissive. And because really what you're doing is you're asking people to do work for you, with you, beside you. And we've all had bosses at some capacity, that are just swarmy and just dicks, that, they're just real dismissive, passive aggressive, do this, do that, like they just order you around, micromanagers, that's the right word, micromanagers. And nobody wants to work with somebody like that. And that's when you're getting paid. When you're contributing your own time, which is essentially your own money, the last thing you want to do is have somebody tell you, is be swarmy and dismissive to you because of whatever reason they may have. So when you're doing things with patches, if you're going to dismiss a patch, tell them. Tell them why. Outline what's going on. If it's someone, especially if it's someone, if it's in GitHub, go look at their history. How much do they contribute? Are they new to this? Is this their first patch? Or is this their first, maybe not their first overall, but the first one for you? And, walk through maybe, hey, this looks good. However, formatting, or I like what you're doing here. However, we're kind of addressing this over here, or this kind of, works with that. You can be nice to somebody while still, what's the word I'm looking for again? You can be nice without having to just bend over and take whatever people are giving you. It's like the rules of Roadhouse. Be nice. Be nice until it's time not to be nice. There's times you just need to tell people to shut up. That happens. But that's usually not the first response, or the second, or even the fifth. It's the idea of, the last two things I want to go over real quick are projects that, for one reason or another, something needs to change. There was a project that I started back in 2009. It was the CMB, Custom Metabox class. I built it with a hodgepodge of code that some of it I wrote, some of it I found in tutorials. Like, this thing was just a monstrosity. And I mentioned it to somebody at a WordCamp. We got together, made it into a cleaner class, kind of extended it a bit, put it up on GitHub. Somebody else contributed, another person contributed, and it grew and grew, and it got to the point where I had no time to maintain this thing. I used it, but there's a lot of things that people wanted to do, and they were doing a lot of cool stuff, and simply I didn't have the time to put into this thing. So Web Dev Studios actually took it over. They refactored it, released a second version because there was no way to keep backwards compatibility with code that I'd written, when I barely knew anything. They outlined, they wrote a full documentation, a wiki, all the stuff that I would have never done due to time. I was glad to hand it over, and it's flourishing and it's doing really well, and I'm glad to see it. Then, sometimes there's just let it go. There's certain projects, like that social sharing, that just doesn't need to exist anymore. There are plenty of social sharing plugins. There's, I think, 50, 70,000 out there, give or take. 4 of them are probably good. And frankly, most of them slow down your site anyway. But the whole point is I did not need to be maintaining another social sharing plugin. I built something once for Google Maps, these tours things that they built. They don't even support them anymore. I don't need to maintain a plugin that is literally impossible to use now. I don't know why people would, but again, you see people that are just holding on to projects that just go. Let it, merge it into somebody else. If somebody wants to take it over, let them take it over. I've got like 35 plugins in the repository. God knows how much code on GitHub. I cannot maintain all of it. If someone's actually putting in the work and they're finding it useful enough that they want to spend their time on it, put your ego aside and be like, yeah, take it. Let them go. Let it go. Let them have it. And you'd be surprised, what people, because they've got that passion to work on something that you did when you started it. Because there's, very little code that I release that I hate the moment I release it. There's a lot of code that I hate a year after I release it, but definitely not at the time that I release it. So I forgot to make that start on its own. It would have been a lot better if I did that. So I just wanted to say thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.